Welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast, episode number 41.
You're listening to the Cash Car Convert Podcast with James Kinson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cash Car Convert Podcast. My name is James Kinson, and I am the Cash Car Convert. And this is the podcast where cash cars are cool and auto debt is dangerous to your financial future. I want to open the episode today by discussing something that I mentioned on last week's podcast, and that is that my grandson, Cole Michael Kinson, was scheduled to be born on Wednesday, August 27th. Well, sure enough, the C-section that was scheduled happened on time, and he did, in fact, make his entree into this world at 1:54 p.m., weighing in at 9 pounds, 3 ounces, with a length of 20 and 1/2 inches. Now, because it was a C-section, he did have some fluid on his lungs after he was born, and so he did have to spend some time in the NICU unit, but he's doing much better now, and things are really looking good, so that's really encouraging. His mother absolutely bounced back I just couldn't believe it. She had the C-section Wednesday, and by Wednesday evening, she was up and walking around. So, I've never had anybody cut on me in that way for any kind of surgery or anything, so I don't have any good basis, but it seemed awfully quick to me, like she bounced back really well. So I was really pleased and happy for her that she was able to bounce back so quickly. So we're all really excited about Cole's entree into the world, and we're really looking forward to him coming home. And as a granddad, I'm looking forward to many hours of playing with him and helping him learn about the world that exists out there. One other topic I want to touch on before I start in on today's main subject, and that is I had some podcasting friends of mine and we went out to eat the other night. And while we were out, we went to a restaurant known as Joe's Crab Shack. Now, that's a seafood chain that I think is nationwide. I'm not completely sure that it's everywhere across the U.S., but certainly pretty prevalent in most places that I visited. I've seen it. But I've never eaten at a Joe's Crab Shack before. I'm not a big seafood person, more of a meat and potatoes kind of guy. So I had never dawned the door of the place before. For the meetup that we were doing, it seemed like a good locale. So we went there and we had dinner the other night. Now, initially 3 of us showed up and we sat down and we placed our order and got our drinks. And then subsequently a couple of other gentlemen showed up. And so we moved to a larger table and we alerted our waitress. So the new gentlemen placed their orders and got their drinks, and everything was going great. Our waitress was very attentive to us. She was checking our drink levels quite often and really took good care of us on that front. The orders came out for the 2 gentlemen who arrived late, and the other 3 of us had not gotten our food yet. So more time passed, and we still hadn't received our food. Again, our waitress remained very attentive. She was filling our glasses and our drinks regularly. She had gone to check in the kitchen on our food, but it just had not come up. So I don't know what happened, and we never did find out what happened and why our food was delayed. But ultimately, a manager came over and asked us how we were doing and how our meal was. And the 3 of us shared that we had not received our meals yet, and she could see that the other 2 gentlemen were almost through with their food, so obviously our food had been very delayed. So she validated what it is we had ordered, asked who our waitress was, and then went into the kitchen, and quickly we had our food brought out to us. We also had another manager come over and tell us that all of our meals and all of our drinks would be complimentary. They also brought out a menu and shared with us that we could have anything else on the menu that we wanted, just to let them know. Now, we did take them up, and there was one other order that was placed, and that was eaten at the table. And the other thing I would say is that the waitress remained very attentive about our drinks. The management came by a couple of more times to check on us, and they were very attentive and really almost overly attentive. I mean, if anything, the interruptions were not welcome at the end. But I, as a patron, I would prefer that they be overly attentive than under attentive, especially when a problem has already shown itself. So I'm not telling this story to take a shot at Joe's Crab Shack in any way, shape, or form. I'm really telling this story to give them kudos. And the reason for that is because everybody is going to make a mistake if they're in the game and they're doing something. Every business is going to make a mistake if they're in the game and doing something. What really matters once a mistake is made isn't so much that it happened, but how the company or person reacts to it. And in this case, the people at Joe's reacted quickly, they reacted swiftly, they took appropriate measures, and they made sure that we were taken care of the rest of the evening. I stated at the beginning of this little talk that I've never been to a Joe's before, but I can tell you that I will go back again. And I'm not a big seafood person, but I like to reward people who react positively and do good things. And so I'm going to go to Joe's again, and I'm going to take my family there. And I expect that we'll have much better service on the front end than we did at the front end of this last visit. But I hope and I expect that we will have just as good a service at the back end, that we will be well taken care of and we'll feel good about the experience when we leave. So having said that, I would encourage all of you out there to go to Joe's, try the restaurant, and give them a shot if there's one in your area. And this is not an affiliate play or a sponsor play on my end. I have no affiliation and no sponsorship with Joe's. Again, I just had the one experience with them, and I just like to reward, people who behave well. I like to reward them. So go eat at Joe's. All right, now we can get into the meat of the issue for today. And today I'm going to talk about perfectionism. And I don't mean perfectionism in the sense of somebody wanting to do a good job or be a person of excellence, because obviously I believe in that very strongly. I think you should put your best foot forward, do your best work, dress appropriately, keep your house neat and clean, your office neat and clean, take care of things when they're supposed to be taken care of. I think striving for perfection in our lives is a very positive thing. Now, obviously, anything that's overdone can be taken too far, but as it relates to just our lives in general, I'm pro-perfection. But there's an area where I wish people would think a little less about things continuing to be perfect in their lives, and that is the financial side of things. From people I know, to myself historically, to people I've read about in articles, people tend to take their financial lives and they view their income, their bring-home income, and they stack debt against it, and that's their measure of what they can and can't afford. They look at the monthly payments, and then oftentimes it's the minimum monthly payments, and they stack them up against their income, and they say, okay, yeah, I can afford this dress, this meal, this car, this house, based on the income that I make and how my debts stack up. And they don't really consider what something really costs necessarily, because it's so easy to just lay a credit card down or to take a loan at your bank or credit union and buy that car, or your mortgage company and buy a really big house. What I find is that when people do that, they ignore a very big fact. And that fact is that life is going to happen to each and every one of us. For some of us, it's going to happen within the next 6 months. For others, it's going to take a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or maybe 10. But for all of us, there are going to be things that happen that disrupt our life and our income flow. It might be that it disrupts our outflow. We may have a death, a birth, a divorce, a job loss. There are any number of things, a natural disaster. There's all kinds of things that can happen to us. And we can't plan for all of them. I'll be the first to say that. Some of these things can really be catastrophic. But there are a lot of them that we can plan for. And to not plan for any of them is just ludicrous. So I would say let's not look at our life today and say that it's going to continue perfectly as it is right now. Our spouses aren't always going to have jobs. Our spouses may decide they don't want to work. There's all kinds of things that can happen that can drive changes in income or changes in outflow. So I'm really encouraging you to build some margin in your life. Don't pay for something that you have today with tomorrow's dollars. Get yourself in line, start to build a plan, live on less than you make. Andy Stanley and his wife, they started off their marriage with the intent to live on 50% of what they brought home. Maybe that's too big a number for you. But Dave Ramsey talks to people about tithing, which is something that I think you should do. There's a lot of blessings that come with tithing, but that's 10%. And that's 10% right off the top. And then if you're putting 20% towards your retirement, now you're at 30%. So you're already at that point living on 70% of your income for your daily needs. So I would encourage you to, at the very minimum, do that, but maybe even shoot to live on less than that. And if you can do that, then you'll build some margin in your life. And you can't insulate yourself from absolutely everything that can happen, but it's a really good start to get you to a place where you can have more margin. And if you have more margin, then you might be able to avoid going into debt when some of these changes in life happen. Now, for some of you, you will be making minimum monthly payments on your credit card, and you might be able to borrow more money on your credit card in the event of some life circumstances. And I know that I've done that. When I had some hiccups in my life and I didn't have an emergency fund, then I looked to credit cards as a way of bridging the gap until I could get back on my feet. And, that burned me at times. At other times it worked out okay, but it's certainly not a good way to live. And here's why. Because at some point that credit becomes exhausted. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to go and harangue friends and family? Maybe you can. Maybe you can for a while, but how long can you do that? How long will people be interested in helping you if you aren't helping yourself? Not long. So then what are you going to do? Well, what a lot of people do is they look to payday loans and title loans. Now, most people who go to these entities we tend to think of as being lower income. And that's not completely false. The average salary of somebody who goes to a payday or title loan is about $26,000. And I know this because I recently read an article where they talk about thousands losing their cars because of payday loans and title loans. And in Texas is a state that's pro-business. We like the idea of bringing businesses into this state because it creates jobs and it gives opportunity to people. And so while the rest of the country has had a really difficult downturn, or many states have, Texas has fared pretty well because the states that have high taxes and a lot of burdens are losing companies to states like Texas where there's less regulation, there's more responsibility on the individual, and there's less taxes on the companies. So they have a lot of incentives to come here. But because there are more responsibility for individuals to be responsible with their money, with their time, with the things they sign up for, then that opens up some in our society to be taken advantage of by these payday loan and title loan companies. So this article details a nurse, and her name was Richardson, and she went through a downturn. And again, it was one of the things that I talked about. Her mother fell ill. She had to take care of her mother. Now, as a nurse, she had a good job. She did have some savings. They don't talk about in the article whether she did or didn't have her cars paid off, but it sounds like she did. They don't get specific, but it sounds like that she did because she was able to borrow some money against them with a payday loan on both her mom's car and her car. She wound up losing her job because she was spending so much time taking care of her mother that her employer felt like that they didn't need to have her around anymore. So she wound up losing her job because she was taking care of her mom who was ill. Then she became financially cash-strapped. She burned through her savings. And at that point, she got into a situation where she had borrowed as much money as she could from friends and family. And so she wound up turning to a payday loan company and borrowed $5,000 against her mother's car. She then fell behind on those payments when she went out of town to take some training for a new job and found out that the payday loans couldn't be paid by phone. At that point, she had to take another loan out on her vehicle, and I believe it was about $2,500, and she subsequently fell behind on that. And she wound up losing both vehicles, and so it wound up not really helping her in the long run. And so she will now tell you that no matter how bad your situation is, do not go to a payday loan or title loan company and try to help yourself out. The people in this industry charge close to 400% interest. Now, these are short-term loans, so depending on the size of the loan, those numbers may not wind up impacting in a big way. But here's the average for those loans. For an average loan of $941 of credit, the average interest is $2,142. So you pay back more than double in interest what you borrowed. Think about that for a minute. You borrow $941, you pay back $2,142. Let's let that sink in for a minute. That's the kind of company that we're talking about here. Now, there are some cities that are in Texas that are starting to set up regulations of their own as a way of trying to minimize the damage that these companies are doing. But I think the best way to work around companies like this is an educated consumer, which is why I'm talking about this today. The first thing you need to do is understand that hiccups are going to happen in life. Life is going to happen to each and every one of us, and we can plan for many things. There are many things we can't plan for, and we may wind up in difficult circumstances. Nobody's promised us that our lives will always be great and rosy, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the obligation to plan as best we can for all the outcomes that might come our way. So I'm encouraging all of you to plan for something that might happen to you in the next 5 years. Be aware that you may get a divorce. You may have a new birth in the family, or you may have to take on a child from another family member. There's a story, a speaker at a conference that I was at back in November of last year. She had 2 sons that were, I think, like 14 and 16. So she had children that were just about to be at the end of being at home, just a few more years, and she would have children off at college. And she and her husband would be on their own, and a family member couldn't take care of her children. And she had 3 children, and I don't remember the exact ages, but somewhere between 3 and 5. There were 3 children, a couple of twins, and so there was 3 children between the ages of 3 and 5 that this woman was now being asked to take on into her family. This was not something that she had planned for. It wasn't something that she saw coming, but now she felt obligated to take care of these children because nobody else in the family really could. So you don't know what's going to come down the path in your life, but if you live with margin, then you can reach out and you can help other people, whether it's taking in children or a family member, a mother that might be ill. You can build some margin in, and you can be a little more prepared. Again, I'm not going to say that you can prepare for every instance. A tornado or a hurricane or an earthquake may devastate you in a way that you can't bounce back from. Or if you're not insured properly, then there could be other things that could happen as well. But my point is, you should be planning to the best of your ability based on the income you make and living well below your means as a way of doing that. If you're living right on the ragged edge, I can just tell you something's going to happen and you will wind up in trouble financially. I'm reminded of the government shutdown that happened last year. When that happened, I was speaking to a woman who worked, and I forget which agency she worked at, but she worked for the federal government, and she was one of the workers that was going to be furloughed. Now, she was a Dave Ramsey follower, and therefore she and her husband had somewhere between 6 and 8 months of money put aside for their expenses. And so the idea of being off for 1 or 2 weeks, while it wasn't a pleasurable thought, it didn't have the negative impact on her that it did on many of her coworkers. I remember seeing on television people coming on saying, how am I going to pay my mortgage if I miss a week of work? How am I going to make my car payment if I miss a week of work? How am I going to pay my bills if I miss a week of work? Well, if you can't pay your bills because you miss 1 week of work, I'm going to submit to you that you have a problem. And that problem is that you haven't properly planned your life. Now, we could go off on a tangent here about the government not planning very well either, but I'm going to leave that for another day and really focus on the personal side here, because it's personal responsibility that I want to get us back to. I want all of us thinking about how we can make our lives better. And if each one of us make our own lives better, then we can make the lives of other people better as well. We won't be a drain on the economy. We'll be a plus to our country, to our government. And if we can do that, and we can get enough individuals doing that, then we can change the entire country. But it happens in homes. It doesn't happen in Washington. Take responsibility, turn your life around, and definitely don't rely on credit cards or payday loans as a way of bridging a gap in hard times. Nothing good can come from that. Okay, one last thing I'm going to touch on here before I close up the show, and that is I saw an interesting article talking about the card gap, they called it. And what this article talked about is the fact that people over 50 tend to pay with cash for things that are under $5, and about 77% of people over 50 do that, while more than half of millennials will use a card to pay for things that are under $5 if they're buying a pack of gum or a Coke or something. Now, the interesting thing about this, even more to me than just the numbers there, was the fact that most of the millennials were using debit cards, not credit cards. Now, I found it really interesting in the article that the financial expert they had speaking went on to say, well, I'm sure once these people have more money that they will then start using credit cards because they'll want to build up their credit history. Now, as a Dave Ramsey follower, I really had to chuckle at that and say, well, I'm hoping that the reason these kids are using debit cards is because they know how dangerous credit is and that they won't start taking on debt just because they're making more money. I'm hoping that they will live within the money that they make and have margin in their life, as I was speaking of earlier. Now, the other thing that this financial expert said is that they needed to be careful using debit cards because debit cards are so much riskier. And I don't, I thought that was a pretty interesting thing for somebody to say in terms of reasons that somebody should get a credit card. But I guess, it's not that uncommon. We have this traditional kind of common sense mindset that we think everybody has, that you want to have credit history, you want to have credit cards, you want to have debt, that there's good debt and all these kinds of things out there. And there may be some things where some people can point to and say that debt has helped them, beyond buying a house. I do have debt on my residential properties, but that's much different than going out and having a meal or buying a car using credit. I'm going to dispute what this gentleman said about the dangers of debit cards, and it's not that they can't be compromised, because they can. But I have a friend. His name is Steve Stewart. And he has a podcast called Plan SOS. And he did an episode a few weeks back. In fact, it's Plan SOS, episode number 158. And it's called, the title is, What Happens When My Debit Card is Stolen? And so he has multiple people on in this episode who've had their debit cards compromised. And they talk about what the process was, how they were treated, how it was handled. And I think anybody who's concerned about using a debit card because of risk issues should listen to this episode. And I really would encourage you to do that. I'll link that up in the show notes and make sure that that's available. But I'm really pleased that the millennials are using debit cards. I hope that they don't follow the financial advice of the gentleman in the column and start going to credit as they make more money. And I hope that they'll take a look at my friend's episode about what happens when your when your debit card is compromised. With that, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode. I'm going to remind all of you that I'm going to be at FinCon, which is a financial bloggers conference in New Orleans, and that's going to be September 18th through the 20th. I'm going to be speaking on a panel there, and I'm also going to be doing a podcast from there that I will air later. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to speak on a panel there about podcasting. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to do a podcast there and bring it back to you guys to listen to here later. I also want to remind you that I was in issue 5 of Pottertainment Magazine, and that's pottertainment.com. So I really encourage you to go out there and give a listen to that. It's a really good podcasting magazine if you're into podcasting at all. And in issue number 6, Cynthia Sanchez from Oh So Pinteresting is the featured speaker. So always really great content in there. If you're thinking about podcasting, it's a great place to get information, and I would encourage you to go and check it out. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap things up here. If you haven't done so, please go out to iTunes and subscribe to the Cash Car Convert podcast. I would also ask you to go out and leave a rating and review. And to do that, you can go to cashcarconvert.com/iTunes, and you can subscribe in iTunes, or you can leave a rating and review. If you aren't an iTunes person, and I'm running into more and more people who say they aren't an Apple fan, while I am, I understand that there's other thoughts out there. So I want to make sure I'm available in other mediums. So please go out to Stitcher, and you can subscribe and leave a rating and review in Stitcher as well. And so to go to access to that, you can go to cashcarconvert.com/Stitcher, and that will get you to my show on Stitcher, and you can subscribe and leave a rating and review. I'm just looking for honest ratings and reviews, something that will help me make the show better. I'm trying to improve it and to put relevant content out there. So if I'm not talking about something that you want me to talk about, let me know. I know one of the things I do hear about that I'm going to be doing an episode on here in the not too distant future is leasing. I've gotten lots of questions about leasing recently, and I need to do some homework on leasing because I've never leased, and make sure that I'm ready to give you guys some good information on that. So that'll be forthcoming. Just a reminder, I am giving away a copy of Smart Money, Smart Kids, and that's an autographed copy by the authors Rachel Cruz and Dave Ramsey. So I'm just a few ratings and reviews away from that right now. I believe I'm at 47 ratings and reviews. All of those are in the U.S. except for one. And when I get to 50, then I'll be doing a drawing, and all of those of you who've left ratings and reviews will be eligible to win the autographed book by Dave Ramsey and Rachel Cruz. I want to thank all my listeners. I really appreciate the fact that you take the time to let me speak into your life on a regular basis. And I hope you're getting valuable content from this show. I want to encourage you to reach out to me if I'm not talking about something that you're interested in, or if there's, again, a topic like leasing that you're really interested in hearing about. Let me know. You can do that at SpeakPipe. You can go to cashcarconvert.com, and on the right-hand side, there's a little tab, and you can click on that, and you can leave me a voicemail message. And that's a great way to contact me. If you would like to leave me a message, that would be wonderful. All right. With that, I'm wrapping up the show here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great week, and God bless.
My daddy was the cash call comment.